people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fucking fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
With this, the ongoing situation in today's ho-hum middleweight division, Golovkin versus Lara. WBA orders March 13th, purse bid for the middleweight title consolidation bout.
That's the Monday after next.
Gennady has a little over a week's time to make a decision. It's time to shit or get off the pot.
That's right.
There appears to be closure. In a month-long effort to consolidate the WBA middleweight titles, BoxingScene.com has learned that the twice-ordered Gennady Golovkin versus Erislandy Lara title fight will now head to a March 13th purse bid hearing. The ruling comes nearly a full month after the sanctioning body instructed the two sides to re-enter talks on February 8th, though with a 15-day negotiation period ending with little progress made. The minimum accepted bid is $200,000 for the middleweight title fight, with Golovkin to earn the favorable end of a 75-25 split as the WBA super champion.
And I like this fight. For some years now, I've wanted to see it.
Both guys are in a similar place, similar stage in their careers, the twilight of it.
For a long time, Erislandy Lara claimed he wanted a Golovkin fight, though it took him long enough to finally move up to the middleweight division in order to get him.
Here it is. While an attractive fight compared to most mandatories, a bidding war is not expected to come of the session. In fact, there stands the greater chance of one side giving up the title, which would, in effect, leave the WBA with one recognized middleweight titleist. Should the March 13th session produce a winning bidder, both sides will be required to commit in writing to enter the fight. Failure to do so would result in said party being stripped of his title per WBA Rule D15, which states that if the champion does not sign a bout contract within the required 20-day period after the bid award or refuses otherwise to participate in the bout for the winning promoter, he shall be considered in violation of these rules and may have his title vacated.
It'll be bad optics for Gennady Golovkin if he chooses to forego this fight after the amount of time Lara's spent calling him out, and now he's at middleweight.
He's his mandatory challenger. What's the problem? Kazakhstan's Golovkin is already down one title after he vacated his IBF middleweight belt on February 8th in lieu of a mandatory title defense versus Brazil's own Esquiva Falcao. The move came nearly 4 months after Golovkin petitioned the IBF to order the mandatory as a means to delay a title consolidation clash with Lara, as the two-time unified middleweight titleist ran out of exceptions with the WBA to avoid the fight.
And that's how it's looking. It's looking like Golovkin doesn't want to do this thing.
He asked for an exception to the mandatory in Lara, and he was granted that exception.
But you didn't make the fight with Esquiva Falcao, so now what's your excuse?
The bout was previously ordered on September 23rd, 6 days after Golovkin lost to Canelo Alvarez at super middleweight.
That was last year.
Golovkin previously inherited Lara as a mandatory challenger upon stopping Ryota Murata in the 9th round of their April 9th title unification bout in Saitama, Japan. The 40-year-old Kazakh boxer defended his IBF belt while claiming the WBA super title with the win.
He's now WBA champion. Ryota Murata, he has since officially announced his retirement. Will Gennady Golovkin be following him?
Is he set to make a similar announcement in lieu of this news?
This order.
It's time to shit it, get off the pot for Gennady Golovkin. He's got to make a decision.
He's at the tail end of his career, in his twilight years.
There is still one or two decent-sized fights, big fights I can think of for today's Gennady Golovkin, even here today at 40 years old. But he's got to make it past Erislandy Lara in order to get to those fights. One among them is a Jaime Munguia fight.
They could make a lot of money with that fight.
Gennady Golovkin, if he can hang on to his WBA title, he can then bring it to a Munguia fight.
The WBA refrained from ordering Golovkin to face Lara due to an existing deal in place calling for the two-time unified middleweight titleist to face Canelo Alvarez in their trilogy.
Golovkin had to get approval from the WBA, which represented his final exception in lieu of a mandatory title defense that came with conditional approval from the WBA, who reminded Golovkin that he would have 120 days next to face Lara.
The clock is ticking.
The IBF title that Gennady relinquished, the one he vacated, will now be contested between Esquiva Falcao and Australia's own Michael Zarafa.
If that fight actually happens.
If it gets made, and if it gets made, I could very much see the winner of that fight going into a unification match with reigning WBO champion Janibek Alimkhanulai,
who is very much in need of a significant fight with a significant fighter. The reset button needs to be hit on today's middleweight division. It has stagnated.
It sucks. There's nothing going on. There's nobody fighting anybody.
No one's fighting each other.
After close to 2 years, or just about 2 years of inactivity, Jermall Charlo is set to return in June. He's this division's reigning WBC champion, who's likely going to be in a tune-up fight when he comes back because he ain't fought in 2 years.
He's not fighting Adames.
That would have been a more interesting fight.
Carlos Adames, he's fighting Julian Williams.
I have no idea what they've got lined up for Janibek Alimkhanulai and Gennady Golovkin. Gennady, his countryman, he's also the absentee champion. I mean,
something's got to give.
He's under orders to face Erislandy Lara, and I see no excuse for him not to fight him outside of retirement. But even if he does retire, it's very bad optics.
Because Lara's wanted him, or claimed that he's wanted him for such a long time, they're in the same age group.
Remember that after the Canelo Alvarez fight, Gennady Golovkin said he's not done. He's not retiring. But if he bails now...
After having said that?
It's just gonna look like Erislandy Lara chased him into retirement. That's a stain. That's gonna be a stain.
That when push came to shove, Golovkin folded.
Is that how this chapter, what could be the final chapter in Gennady Golovkin's professional boxing career, is that how it's going to end? With a whimper instead of a bang?
Well, we'll find out shortly.
In other news, I'm sure that most of you have heard by now that Conor Benn is set to make an appearance on the Piers Morgan show for a TV interview regarding his entire banned substance fiasco.
His ongoing rift with the BBBOC, in spite of the fact that the WBC and VADA have all but cleared him.
And it's their tests that had the adverse finding, not the BBBOC's, not you cats.
Curious that Conor Benn chose to go to Piers Morgan, of all people, with all of this.
Conor Benn looks set to lift the lid on the saga that has seen him absent from the ring. The undefeated welterweight has been out for some considerable time after failing 2 drug tests. Benn, 21-0 with 14 KOs, was set to take on Chris Eubank Jr. in a catchweight contest last year before it came to light via a national newspaper article that he had traces of clomiphene in his system.
Well, that much we know already.
The BBBOC is insistent that they will not allow Conor Benn to box on British soil until he has cleared his name with them.
But the question is, what exactly does that entail?
And why are they hanging on to the findings, the adverse findings, of a third-party anti-doping organization they don't adhere to or work with?
Why are they giving this kid such a hard time?
And why didn't Conor Benn take the out that the WBC gave him? You know, the whole bit about eggs and the clomiphene coming from them.
Is he choosing to stand apart from both the BBBOC and the WBC?
Why, indeed. The British Boxing Board of Control prohibited the bout between Conor and Chris Eubank Jr., which was meant to take place on October of 2022 at London's O2 Arena, exclusively live on DAZN pay-per-view. Benn reacted angrily towards the findings of the WBC earlier this week and no longer has a Board of Control license, having voluntarily relinquished it in the aftermath of the failed tests. And now, it seems the 26-year-old will get the chance to tell his side of the story in even more depth when he sits down with Piers Morgan next week. Morgan tweeted on Friday, "Exclusive. After 2 failed drug tests and his career hanging by a thread, boxing star Conor Benn breaks his silence."
After the WBC's investigation and their subsequent conclusion that the clomiphene found in Conor Benn's system likely came from tainted eggs,
Conor Benn had the option to take it and run. Use that as the cover story. Use that as the explanation for what was going on. As silly as that might have sounded, it's no more silly than Oscar Valdez's herbal tea story in light of the phentermine that was found around in his system.
Conor could have taken that egg explanation and ran with it just as easily as Oscar took that tea explanation and ran with it, but he didn't.
And I don't think enough people are making light of that he was, in effect, given an out.
He's not going with it.
And it's because that's not what he's pointing to. That's not what he's been saying this whole time. He's been pointing the finger at whatever accredited lab handled his samples.
Mishandled if he's telling the truth.
Yet another aspect of this story that I don't think people are making enough light of. If what Conor says is true,
If we are to believe what he's saying and we entertain it, it's very troubling.
Conor Benn has posted a series of statements during the time since the fight with Chris Eubank Jr., who has since returned to the ring and been stopped inside 4 rounds by former WBO Super Welterweight World Champion Liam Smith in a middleweight contest at Manchester's AO Arena in January. Exclusively live on Sky Sports Box Office, was cancelled as well as giving a newspaper interview. The interview, which will form part of the Piers Morgan Uncensored show on Talk TV, will air at 8 p.m. UK time on Monday.
This Monday.
I saw a clip from an interview, a recent interview with Eddie Hearn, detailing what's going on and why Conor isn't taking this lying down, stating there's more coming, more information, more details. Though what details Conor's already made available, they are concerning.
You know what the problem is? The problem is people don't want to listen.
They've read this book before. They've read it so many times and heard so many ridiculous explanations from other fighters, many other fighters in this same situation. They're not giving Conor Benn the benefit of the doubt or paying attention to what exactly he's alleging. What is he saying?
If they were paying attention, they'd know that egg explanation, it didn't come from him.
That came from the WBC and their own investigation. Conor Benn's investigation points in another direction entirely.
Which, you'll excuse me for saying so, very much implicates the VADA-accredited lab that handled his samples and perhaps the WBC themselves, since they work with them.
People aren't listening. They don't want to.
Admittedly, I wasn't either until I read through what exactly it was that Conor was alleging, and I have to say it is troubling if this stuff is true.
That there were clear irregularities and flaws with testing procedures. The first sample came back clear 3 times, and only when it was tested a 4th time, 9 days later, did an adverse finding show up.
If it came back clear the first 3 times, why did they test it a 4th time? What the hell were they doing? What were they looking for?
Why was Conor Benn's independent scientist not allowed to enter the room upon the opening of the B sample?
That's what they're there to do. They're there to bear witness to ensure that there's no funny business going on, that nothing...
Somebody don't walk by and put something in the sample that may result in an adverse finding. You know, I mean, that's what they're there to do. That's their job.
So now Conor Benn has gone and offered up Piers Morgan, of all people, an exclusive tell-all interview set to go down this Monday.
Why Piers Morgan, of all people? I mean, what's Conor Benn's angle here? And I think what he's going for is...
The boxing world won't listen to him. The boxing world itself, it doesn't believe him.
Conor Benn himself... Maybe he feels like he's being set up. I mean, if we are to believe that he's innocent in all of this, that he didn't willfully ingest clomiphene, then maybe the reason he's going to Pierce, of all people, is because the boxing world is turned on him.
They won't listen.
So he's going to someone that will. Someone with a bigger audience than boxing's niche audience.
The usual suspects, the BBBOC themselves, are giving him a very hard time.
I mean, if he were guilty, if we're going to run with that, and if we're all about just saving face and covering his tracks, then why didn't he just go with the WBC's explanation? Why persist?
As ridiculous as that explanation is, we've heard worse.
Conor Benn doesn't want to go with that. That's not his side of the story or his account of events. So could it be that the reason he's doing all of this is because he feels he's being set up?
Gotta be a reason.
Well, there's that, but there's also the fact that the BBBOC won't license him until he proves his innocence. But what exactly does that entail?
The WBC and their experts have cleared him, so what does the BBBOC want?
It's almost like they don't want that guy boxing on British soil. We'll see what develops on Monday when Conor Benn tells Piers Morgan his side of the story. Men's lightweight news ahead of their upcoming undisputed title fight. Vasyl Lomachenko tabs Devin Haney as one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. Unlike some fighters, Vasyl Lomachenko is choosing not to disparage his opponent.
He's not talking him down like some other guys would.
He says he's a top fighter, and now he's one of the best boxers, pound for pound, in the world in power weight classes. At the newly turned age of 35, Vasyl Lomachenko recently ended his time on the sidelines and returned to the winner's circle. On October 29th at the Hulu Theater in New York's Madison Square Garden, Lomachenko boxed his way to a unanimous decision victory over highly ranked contender Jamaine Ortiz. Soon after having his hand raised in victory, Haney sauntered into the ring as the two began to exchange words. Bob Arum, their promoter, revealed that the pair will ultimately face off later this year.
And that's supposed to be in May in either Saudi Arabia or Las Vegas.
You often hear it said, in reference to Devin Haney, that of all the undisputed champions the sport has seen in the last 5 years, he had the weakest undisputed run among them.
I've seen those criticisms.
I mean, I guess that when you compare his undisputed run to, say, Alexander Usyk's or Josh Taylor's or Jermell Charlo's, even Terrence Crawford's,
even now Yaino's.
perhaps Devin's undisputed run compared to theirs pales in comparison in terms of resistance and difficulty.
But what you want to remember is that Devin Haney was only 23 years old when he became an undisputed champion.
Context is key. That was just last year, and he was only 23 years old when he did that. He's only 24 now.
Still very young, with many good years ahead of him. That career accomplishment is just one of many accomplishments he could have throughout his boxing career.
Because he's only 24.
I, unlike some others, choose not to criticize Devin Haney for what he's done so far. I don't see the need. I think he's made the most of a highly political situation in today's lightweight division, fighting who he has fought and having accomplished what he has accomplished.
For that, he ranks in at number 8 on the current Ring IQ pound-for-pound list's rank standings.
Current ones.
Per the rules that govern the list. In defeating a pound-for-pound fighter, you become one yourself. It wasn't not that long ago, that Vasyl Lomachenko was ranked as a pound-for-pound fighter who subsequently lost to Teofimo Lopez, who then subsequently lost to George Kambosos, who then subsequently lost to Devin Haney. That's more or less how he got here.
In the bottom tier.
The third tier. There's more work needs doing before he can enter into the second tier, and a lot more work that will need doing for him to enter into the top tier. Though for what it's worth, at 24 years old, already having seen himself become an undisputed champion, it is safe to say that he is one of the best boxers in the sport.
Even if he's not top 5 pound for pound.
He's only 24 years old. He's got plenty of time to get there, and he's giving the fans the fight that they want, the fight that some fans thought that he was running from.
And the fight that some fans thought that Vasyl Lomachenko was running from. I myself never bought into those narratives. I understood that the rift between them
wasn't actually a rift between them. The delay in what was supposed to be their fight, that had more to do with their promoters than the fighters themselves. But here we are.
And if Vasyl Lomachenko considers Devin Haney one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the sport, the question is, why don't you?
Even if his undisputed run isn't as difficult as, say, Usyk's was, or Josh Taylor's, or Jermell Charlo's, even if it's not as comprehensive, it's still pretty impressive that a 23-year-old kid saw himself become an undisputed champion.
And he did it on the road.
Will he stay an undisputed champion? Well, that's a different question.
If Vasyl Lomachenko beats him, per the rules that govern the list, in defeating a pound-for-pound fighter, he will become one himself, become one again.
We'll see what happens.